As debates around the national minimum wage continue around the country, the Center for Social Development at the University of Johannesburg conducted a study that has found that young people across all age groups have limited knowledge of the proposed minimum wage, its purpose, and how the current system of collective bargaining and sectoral determination works. Many earn below the sectoral minimum wage. A national minimum wage could substantially reduce the exploitative pay practices that were uncovered by this research. And to discuss the findings by the center, we're joined by Director Prof Leila Patel, as well as Economist at Nascence Advisory and Research, Xhanti Payi. Welcome, Prof. and Xhanti. Pleasure to have you with us here. Let me start with you, Professor Patel, because your center conducted the study. Just talk us through the methodology and the questions that you were seeking to answer.
Well, ours was a study we tried to find the voices of the youth. So we went out and spoke to youth in 5 provinces, in urban and rural areas. We ran focus group discussions with them. And we had lengthy 3-hour engagements on what a minimum wage was, what they thought it was, how they thought it would affect them. And they were both made up of both employed and unemployed youth. So, and they participated, they were very excited and involved in the process. So we learned a lot from them.
Now, and of course, the focus was on the youth, particularly because they are the worst affected when it comes to unemployment in the country, right? And there's also suggestion from your report that there are a lot of exploitative practices out there. What do you mean? Firstly, give me a sense of the unemployment situation and as far as it affects the youth, as well as the exploitative practices that you uncovered.
So we know that 3.5 million young people are not in employment, education and training. That's a large percentage of our young people.
They're not
18 to 20. They're not employed.
They're
not in any education or in a training.
Yeah, and we're talking about which age cohort here?
18 to 25.
18 to 25, 3.5 million of them are just... They're excluded from the system, as it were.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they are struggling to get access to the labor market. So that's just the one group. But those who are employed, it's a very small population of that age group, about 20% only. 1 in 5 have a job. So most young people are outside the labor market. But for those who were in the labor market, what they told us was that they were often found that they were in precarious jobs, that they also experienced very risky work situations, insecure employment, and so on. And they worried, they weren't sure whether minimum wage would even benefit them. They didn't understand what it was either. But by the end of our conversations, they did.
But here's the point, Prof. I can imagine. If you earn 10,000, 8,000, 15, whatever, when somebody tells you about minimum wage, you wonder, what is minimum wage? You may even worry that they're going to reduce your income. But you're talking about exploitative practices in many situations. What do you mean? I mean, how much are they paid?
Well, nationally, the data tells us that they earn about 2,500 rand in that age group a month. And the group of people in our study, they earn 2,000 rand a month. Those who were looking for work, they also experience a lot of other problems in finding work. Scams that they experience, the high cost of job search. For those young people, it costs about 550 rand if they look for a job 2 to 3 times a month. And if you take into account the cost of doing a CV and internet costs and data costs, it comes to almost 1,000 rand.
I'm asking that question, and Xhanti, please comment on this, because the generally held view by people who are professionals or operate their own businesses or are doing well themselves is that many young South Africans are spoiled anyway. And then this call for minimum wage is not going to help anybody. It's just going to push up costs and that the wages they earn are high already. But 2,000 rands definitely is extremely low, in your view.
Look, I think it is, and I think it starts even at the level where we think about these learnerships and traineeships, right? That the language itself is poor, because you'll listen to the government sometimes saying, you know, people need opportunities to learn. So if you put somebody in a learnership, they can be volunteers and they get a stipend. And sometimes then people count that as their income, you know, because you are getting a 1,500 stipend, or the learnership itself says, you know, you may pay 2,300. And so that is almost a setting in itself in the manner in which young people then are being brought into the labor environment, because they are desperate to get some sort of experience, some sort of, you know, leg in the door. So you do find a sense of, even the way we're discussing work, is that it's not so much that actually they are bringing a contribution or experience or anything, but that they are actually being helped in. And that has, in some sense, I think, you know, informed some of the thinking that we have around employers themselves. Because one of the things that you want employers to do when thinking about young people is to think about them as an important resource into their business. And one of the attitudes I think we have as a problem, you know, when people say in South Africa, oh, young people are inexperienced. Of course, that's a natural thing. It's almost like when you buy any other resource in your business, you say, I want to buy new technology. The new technology actually does not come with experience. It must be fitted into the workings of your environment. So you would have to hire more people to bring it in, to train people to make sure that it actually works. But we don't seem to think of like that in the human capital space. But I think that actually has a lot of other implications in terms of where we come from in our history and all of those kinds of things, that in the way we think about labor, it's as if actually it is not so much of a worthwhile resource when it is. And of course, I mean, to call human beings resources is probably another problem. But certainly, if we think about as an employer, as a business person, you are looking for a resource in terms of creating performance within your organization, you ought to think about it, that it actually does come with some demands on your part in order to play.
Well, I want to go back to the national minimum wage idea in the first place. What is the point of it? Again, the generally held view, especially amongst employers, is that it's just going to push up the costs of doing business in South Africa, and that it is an insane concept in an economy such as ours. But on the basis of your research, it was particularly amongst the youth, but I'm sure it applies even with older people who are employed. The situation is completely different. There is definitely a need, I would like to believe, for a national minimum wage.
Yes, I mean, we've got a large number of sectoral wage determinations, so we cover different sectors. Only about 20% of workers are outside the minimum wage legislation currently. But a national minimum wage will certainly streamline the whole system. It will prevent exploitation, it will protect workers, and it will set a minimum standard below which no one should fall. So I think very few people have a problem with that idea. Young people had very high expectations of what a wage should be when we interviewed them. But at the end of the day, they said, we want to work. So the view that young people don't want to work is actually not correct. From our study, they said they would take a job at any wage because they want a work opportunity. Now, a lack of work experience is one of the big factors in employing young people, because they don't have experience. And so you're looking for skilled workers, but here we have a vast workforce, potential workforce, and a human resource that is not being used and employed in our economy. And that the young people can make a contribution.
And most probably coming at much lower cost anyway than the so-called skilled or experienced worker who will be coming at a particular pay range.
Oh. But just to go back, employers, we also interviewed employers, and the large employers, the corporates, said that they could absorb a minimum wage. They were actually not opposed to it, provided it was not set too high. So the level of the wage is very important, and we should speak about that as well. But the small employers, the small businesses, they thought that that would be hard for them to absorb the higher wage if it's set too high. Now that is very important, because 68% of young people are employed in small businesses. So that would impact hugely on them.
Let me expand this then to the employment situation in the country, because we've been living with the statistics that are very high, more than 25%, for how long now? It's been quite a while. And somehow it's like a built-in number into our system. But
Well, sorry, Tim, the numbers are actually rising of unemployed youth.
Yes.
If we compare 2016 data with 2008,
Yes.
then the number of unemployed youth has actually increased.
it has increased.
It has increased.
What is the number now? I mean, comparatively speaking,
Oh, I haven't got it offhand,
But-
but,
but
there's a
it's-
good
it's-
5-6% increase.
than what it was.
In
So
2008.
the situation is not improving, it's getting worse.
Exactly.
So talking about the broader employment situation in South Africa, then, where should changes happen? You know, again, I go back to the view held that we shouldn't be concerned about minimum wages. We should be concerned about creating more opportunities, whatever we call them. And the country you've suggested that those opportunities themselves are problematic. So, you know, as you study these things, you compare to other economies around the world, what is it that we should or could be doing that we're not doing in South Africa?
Look, I mean, we talk about creating jobs, and I think in that sense, we're probably on the right direction. But what any business, because it all starts within the business environment that actually employs a young person or any person to begin with, that business must need to employ people. And so in order to create that need, we've got to do a couple of things that actually allow that environment. And one of the things we've been talking about over and over is to create an economic environment in South Africa that allows for people to actually be needed by businesses. What we have now is an economic environment in which businesses don't need people because they themselves are not growing. There's not a lot of economic activity, so you don't go out to get something you don't need. So we are getting a lot of young people coming out of school, and I think we're starting to succeed in actually improving education, no matter how little. And so they are coming into the space, they are looking to find some opportunity, but businesses are saying, well, we don't actually need anybody. The people we have are doing quite well for the demand that we are getting. So how do we increase demand conditions in the economy? That relies on actually making sure that the economy is starting to actually work, whether we're talking about infrastructure, how we think about agriculture, how we think about the different sectors themselves. And one of the things is that we haven't done is to actually look at economy-wide problems and actually fix them so that business people themselves then can say, look, actually now the economy is working. I need to supply Timothy with 5 more cameras because, you know, his business is growing, and then we can hire 5 more young people to work the cameras. Our problem is that actually the businesses themselves don't need. And one of the things we've been doing is to say we're going to incentivize employers to hire young people. What we've been doing is to say to them, well, take something you don't need. Here are the 5 cameras. And you're going to put them there anyway because you're getting them for free. And maybe you might get rid of the old cameras that were working because you are thinking, well, if I'm getting some for free, why
This
not?
technology is working
Exactly.
for me, so
you
it
know what I
reduces
mean?
them.
And that may even actually make things worse. And so what we need to do is to fix the bottlenecks.
Now, Prof, from your point of view, having conducted the research and interacting with employers and the different sectors as well as the youth, the young people themselves, what do you think we should be doing? Where are we missing the point in South Africa?
Look, we've got two issues that we need to deal with. On the one hand, we know that people who have skills and who have a degree at least or a matric, they're more likely to get a job. And that's not taking on anybody extra, okay, beyond over and above what a business can manage. And then we've got a vast number of, we're talking now about young people in particular, who don't have their foot in the door. Organizations that we're conducting research with that are working to match young people, giving them the basic skills, learning the technical skills, the vocational skills, the social skills of how do you conduct yourself in the work environment. They are finding quite a bit of, they're showing that there's success, and that, and then they match them in the labor market where there's a demand for jobs. So they look at where are the growth areas in the economy. So they've got young people placed in financial services. I'm talking about Harambee is one of the organizations that does this, for example. Some private sector organizations also do this. And they're showing success. And what they're finding is once a young person is in a job and they have that work opportunity, they're more likely to be employed a year later. So giving them that opportunity to have access to the labor market early on will set them up well for the future.
Well, brief question and response from you. Going back to the minimum wage, necessary or not necessary, and where do you think it should be set?
Well, I can't really make that judgment call. There's the Presidential Review Commission that is doing that, the panel. We have made presentations to them, But the range that the young people have said to us is between 2,000 and 2,005 at minimum. But the range is being set by various researchers very widely, from 2,400 to 4,500 is what is currently being debated.
And Xhanti?
Look, I think as the Prof says, there are different research pieces out there discussing this question. And of course, we have the different sectoral determinations that we already have. And wherever the minimum wage settles may be above or below that. Yeah. And also, we have had a problem, even with the ones we've got, a lot of violation in terms of employers.
That's likely to take place.
To take place. That's already been taking place.
But the sense I get from yourselves is that we definitely need a minimum wage, irrespective of the current unemployment situation in the country. Due to the exploitative elements that are out there, I suppose.
If you can actually implement it, I think part of the problem is that
whether it will be implemented or not.
All
right, Xhanti Payi, thank you very much, and Professor Leila Patel, much appreciated, and thank you for being my guests on the show. So there you are. You would not believe this, but there are people who are earning less than 2,000 rands in South Africa, full-time employment for that matter, young South Africans, as much as the widely held view is that many of them do not want to work or are too expensive resources to be recruited into a workplace. But the evidence does not speak to that, does not agree with that view. Professor Leila Patel and the Economist at Nascence Advisory and Research, Xhanti Payi. Thanks once again.